In a shadowy Dubai auction, an Arab billionaire stakes a fortune on a single mother, seeking an heir to secure his legacy. Zaid al-Mansour bids $1 million for Noor Hassan, her desperation a silent bargain for her son's future. But what he uncovers in the days ahead jolts him to his core. Press play. This is a tale of secrets and redemption you won't forget. The Grand Hall in Dubai shimmered under a cascade of crystal chandeliers, their light bouncing off polished marble floors and gilded walls. The air buzzed with the low hum of wealth. Men in tailored suits and silk ties, their voices a murmur of power and privilege, sipping champagne as they lounged in velvet chairs. It was a world Noor Hassan had only glimpsed in glossy magazines, a far cry from her cramped Riverton apartment with its peeling paint and unpaid bills. Tonight, though, she stood in its heart, her worn sandals hidden beneath a borrowed black dress, her pulse hammering as she faced an unthinkable choice. At 28, with dark eyes shadowed by sleepless nights and a resolve hardened by hardship, Noor had come to an auction unlike any other, one where women were the lots, their futures sold to the highest bidder. She lingered in a corner, her arms crossed tight over her chest, the weight of her decision pressing down like a stone. Sammy, her 6-year-old son, was back in Riverton with Mrs. Fatima, their elderly neighbor, his small voice still ringing in her ears from their goodbye. "Be good, Mama. Come home soon." The memory twisted her gut, his gap-toothed smile, his thin frame under a patched sweater, the nights he'd gone to bed with an empty stomach because she couldn't stretch their last dollar far enough. Eviction notices piled up, the landlord's threats grew sharper, and her part-time waitressing couldn't keep them afloat. This auction, whispered about in desperate circles, was her last resort, a chance to buy Sammy a future, even if it cost her everything. The event organizer approached, a slim man in a pristine suit, his smile too wide, too practiced. "Noor Hassan, yes?" he said, his voice smooth as oil. "Lot 23. When your name's called, step up, keep your chin high, smile, and don't stare at the guests. Understand?" Noor nodded, her throat dry, her fingers digging into her palms. He adjusted her dress's neckline with a clinical touch, then strode off, leaving her alone with the dread clawing at her chest. The hall pulsed with anticipation, the men watching each woman like appraisers at an art gallery, their eyes cold and calculating. Noor swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing as the auctioneer's voice boomed through the room. Lot 22 sold for $750,000. Her turn came too fast. "Lot number 23, the organizer announced, his tone theatrical, a showman's flourish in every syllable. Noor's legs shook as she climbed the short steps to the stage, the spotlight's glare blinding her, its heat prickling her skin. Sweat beaded on her forehead, trickling down her neck as she forced her shoulders back, her gaze fixed on the far wall. The room blurred into a sea of faces, sharp suits, glinting cufflinks, whispers of approval rippling through the crowd. "A rare gem," the organizer purred, circling her like a vulture. "Exotic grace, a vision of resilience, perfect for the discerning gentleman." The words stripped her bare, each adjective a blade exposing her to their hunger. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, fighting the urge to run. The bids began low, $200,000, then $350,000. Voices rising in a clipped, competitive cadence. Noor's stomach churned, her breath shallow as the numbers climbed, each one a chain tightening around her future. Then a voice cut through the din, deep and resonant, slicing the air like a thunderclap. $1 million. The hall fell into a stunned hush, every head swiveling to the back row. There, seated with an air of unshakable authority, was Zaid al-Mansour, tanned skin, piercing dark eyes, his tailored thobe a stark contrast to the Western suits around him. At 35, he was a figure of legend, an Arab magnate whose wealth dwarfed imaginations, his discretion as renowned as his power. His bid hung heavy, unchallenged. The organizer blinked, momentarily thrown, then recovered with a flourish. $1 million. Do I hear more? Silence answered, the other bidders shrinking under Zaid's gaze. Sold, he declared, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. Noor's knees wobbled, but she held her ground, stepping off the stage on unsteady legs, the weight of her new reality crashing down. Her life had shifted in an instant. sold to a stranger for a sum she couldn't fathom. Zaid rose, his movements deliberate, and approached her, his expression unreadable, a storm brewing behind those sharp eyes. "I'm Zaid al-Mansour," he said, his voice calm but firm, extending a hand to guide her. "We need to discuss terms." Noor hesitated, her skin prickling as she met his gaze, serious, commanding, a man who owned the room without effort. She followed him, her heart pounding, into a private chamber off the hall, its elegance a stark contrast to the chaos in her mind. The door clicked shut, sealing them in a spacious room with silk curtains and a gleaming mahogany table. Zaid gestured to an armchair, his presence filling the space as he picked up an envelope from the table. "This is the contract," he said, handing it to her. "Read it carefully." Noor took it, her hands trembling, the paper rustling as she opened it. The words blurred at first, legal terms, clauses, but the core stabbed her like ice. Bear his child, then leave with the money. She looked up, her voice shaking. "You want me to have a child and abandon it?" Zaid crossed his arms, his nod curt. "I need an heir. After the birth you'll be free, with the million." Noor stood, indignation surging through her. "I can't leave my own child." Zaid's eyes narrowed, his tone unwavering. "You chose this, Noor. There's no turning back now." Her breath hitched, Sammy's face flashing in her mind, the sacrifice she'd made for him now twisting into a new nightmare. She sank back into the chair, the contract a shackle in her hands, her future sold under Dubai's glittering lights. Zaid watched her, his gaze steady, unyielding. A man who'd bought more than her time. He'd claimed her destiny. The private room off the auction hall in Dubai was a cocoon of opulence. Silk curtains cascading down the walls, a mahogany table polished to a mirror sheen, and a chandelier casting soft, golden light over everything. Noor Hassan sat rigid in the armchair, the contract trembling in her hands, its stark terms searing into her mind. Bear Zaid al-Mansour's child, then walk away with $1 million. Her dark eyes, wide with disbelief, flicked up to meet his. Zaid stood across from her, arms crossed, his tan face an unreadable mask framed by the crisp lines of his thobe. At 35, he exuded a quiet power, his piercing gaze pinning her in place as the weight of her decision sank deeper. "I can't abandon my own child," Noor said again, her voice cracking, rising from the chair with a surge of defiance. The words spilled out, raw and jagged, fueled by the image of Sammy, her 6-year-old son, his small hands waving goodbye that morning in Riverton. Zaid's eyes narrowed, a flicker of impatience breaking his calm. "You understood the stakes when you stepped onto that stage," he replied, his tone steady, edged with steel. "This isn't a game, Noor. I paid $1 million for this arrangement. There's no room for second thoughts." She gripped the contract tighter, its edges crumpling under her fingers. "This is wrong," she shot back, her chest heaving. "You can't just buy a baby and toss the mother aside." Zaid stepped closer, his presence looming, filling the room with an authority that silenced her protests. "Sign it," he said, placing a sleek pen on the table with a deliberate thud. "Once the child is born, you'll have your freedom, and the money. That's the deal." Noor's breath hitched, her mind a storm of anger and despair. Sammy's face flashed again, his thin cheeks, the patched sweater, the nights she'd whispered apologies as he slept hungry. This was for him, she told herself, the only way to bury the bills and eviction threats. Tears burned her eyes, but she swallowed them, her hand shaking as she snatched the pen and scrawled her name across the page. Zaid took the contract, his nod curt. "Good. Tomorrow medical exams. Then you'll come to my estate. Rest tonight." He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving Noor alone in the suffocating silence. She stared at her signature, a jagged mark of surrender, and felt the walls close in. Her fate was sealed, a chain forged in ink and desperation. She sank back into the chair, her hands covering her face, the weight of what she'd done crashing over her like a wave. This wasn't just about money, it was her soul, traded for Sammy's future, and the cost was a child she'd never hold. The next morning, a sleek limousine idled outside her Riverton apartment, its black finish gleaming under the pale dawn light. Noor stood in the doorway, her worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her heart breaking as she knelt before Sammy. His dark curls framed a face lit with innocent trust, his small hand clutching hers. "Mama's got to work far away for a bit," she said, her voice trembling, forcing a smile. "I'll call you, okay? Be good for Mrs. Fatima." Sammy grinned, waving with confidence. "Okay, Mama. Hurry back." She hugged him tight, memorizing the feel of his thin arms, then pulled away before the tears fell, leaving him with the neighbor's kind eyes watching her go. The drive to Dubai was a blur, the desert sands giving way to towering glass structures and manicured streets. Noor stared out the tinted window, her reflection a ghost against the shifting landscape, her stomach knotted with dread. The limousine rolled through tall iron gates, revealing Zaid's estate, a sprawling mansion straight from a dream, its white walls rising against lush gardens and fountains that shimmered in the sunlight. Zaid waited at the entrance, his thobe pristine, his expression as serious as ever. He guided her inside, his voice clipped as he pointed out the layout: living quarters, a dining hall, a library, each room more extravagant than the last. "Your privacy will be respected," he said, "but I expect compliance with the agreement. No exceptions." Noor nodded mutely, her sandals silent on the marble floors, the grandeur overwhelming her senses. Zaid handed her off to Salma, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile and a hijab framing her gentle face. "I'll show you to your room," Salma said, her voice a soft balm against the mansion's cold elegance. They climbed a sweeping staircase, passing Persian rugs and paintings that screamed wealth, until Salma opened a door to a spacious chamber, soft beige walls, a plush bed draped in silk, a balcony overlooking the desert horizon. Clothes lay folded on the bed, elegant tunics and scarves far beyond Noor's means. "If you need anything, I'm nearby," Salma offered, her smile lingering as she left. Noor dropped her duffel, the thud echoing in the vast room, and crossed to the balcony. The desert stretched endless before her, a sea of gold under a blazing sky, its beauty mocking the cage she'd entered. She pressed her hands to the railing, her thoughts spiraling to Sammy, the pain of his absence a knife in her chest. This was for him, she repeated, a mantra to steady her shaking resolve, but the contract's terms gnawed at her. A child she'd carry, birth, and leave. Another piece of her heart torn away. She sank onto the bed, the silk cool against her skin, and buried her face in her hands, the weight of her sacrifice suffocating her. A soft knock broke her reverie. Zaid, his frame filling the doorway, his eyes as unreadable as ever. "Tomorrow we see my doctor," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Be ready." Noor nodded, her voice lost, and he turned away, leaving her with the echo of his footsteps. She lay back, staring at the ceiling's ornate patterns, the mansion's silence pressing down like a shroud. Sleep wouldn't come. Not tonight. Not with the contract's chains tightening around her, binding her to a future she couldn't escape. For Sammy, she'd endure it, but the cost was a shadow growing darker with every breath. The morning sun spilled through the balcony doors of Noor Hassan's room in Zaid al-Mansour's Dubai mansion, its golden rays glinting off the silk sheets and ornate furniture. She lay awake, her dark eyes tracing the ceiling's intricate patterns, the plush bed beneath her a stark contrast to the lumpy mattress she'd shared with Sammy back in Riverton. The silence was deafening. No creak of floorboards, no hum of a neighbor's TV, just the faint whisper of the desert wind outside. At 28, Noor felt like a stranger in her own skin. The borrowed tunic she wore, soft linen and muted beige, clinging to her like a costume she couldn't shed. This was her new reality, a gilded prison forged by a contract she'd signed in desperation. She rose, her bare feet sinking into the thick rug, and padded to the balcony, the warm breeze brushing her face as she gazed at the endless dunes. The mansion's gardens stretched below, manicured hedges, fountains sparkling like jewels, a beauty that felt hollow without Sammy's laughter to fill it. Her chest tightened, the memory of his small hand waving goodbye clawing at her. She'd been here 3 days, each one a blur of adjustment and unease, the contract's terms, bear Zaid's child, then leave, looping in her mind like a relentless echo. She turned back inside, the room's elegance mocking her. A wardrobe of fine clothes, a vanity with perfumes she'd never use, all trappings of a life that wasn't hers. Downstairs the mansion unfolded like a labyrinth of wealth. Noor wandered its halls, her sandals whispering against marble floors, past Persian rugs and towering windows that framed the desert beyond. The library caught her eye, floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with leather-bound books, a sanctuary of quiet amid the opulence. She ran her fingers over the spines, the scent of aged paper a fleeting comfort, and pulled a novel free, a story of love and loss, its pages yellowed, but alive. She tucked it under her arm, a small rebellion against the emptiness, and continued her exploration. The music room stopped her cold. Its door stood ajar, revealing a grand piano gleaming under soft lights, exotic instruments lining the walls. Ouds, a sitar, a drum with stretched hide. She stepped inside, the air cool and still, and brushed her hand over the piano keys, the faintest note humming through the silence. A memory flickered, her mother teaching her simple tunes on a battered upright in Riverton, Sammy giggling as she fumbled the chords. Her throat tightened, and she pulled back, the sound fading as quickly as it came. This place was a paradox, breathtaking yet soulless, a reflection of the man who owned it. Zaid al-Mansour appeared that afternoon, his presence a jolt as Noor sat in the garden, the novel open on her lap. He stood near a rare flowering shrub, his thobe pristine against the green, a pair of shears in his hand as he trimmed its leaves with meticulous care. At 35, he carried an aura of control, his tan face set in a mask of concentration, his dark eyes flicking briefly to her. "Settling in?" he asked, his voice low, clipped, the first words he'd spoken to her since the doctor's visit was scheduled. Noor nodded, her grip tightening on the book. "It's different," she said, choosing her words carefully. "More than I'm used to." He didn't smile, didn't soften, just snipped another leaf with precision. "Good. The exams are tomorrow. Everything's arranged. Salma will take you." He turned back to the plant, dismissing her without a glance, his focus unwavering. Noor watched him, her stomach twisting. This was the man who'd bought her future, a millionaire who pruned his own garden, yet spoke to her like a business associate. She stood, the novel a shield against her chest, and returned inside, the encounter leaving a bitter taste. He was a wall, impenetrable, and she was a tenant in his domain, nothing more. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Noor ventured back to the music room. The piano drew her again, its keys a silent invitation. She sat, her fingers hovering, then pressed a chord, a halting, melancholic sound that filled the space. She played softly, a tune her mother had loved, the notes trembling with the ache of Sammy's absence. The door creaked, and she froze, her hands jerking back as Zaid stepped in, his silhouette stark against the hall's light. He'd shed his thobe for a simple shirt and trousers, his expression unreadable, caught off guard. "You play," he said, not a question, his voice quieter than before. Noor's pulse raced, her hands retreating to her lap. "A little. My mother taught me. Long ago." He stepped closer, his gaze lingering on the piano, a shadow crossing his face. "Mine too," he murmured, almost to himself, his fingers brushing the keys with a ghost of a touch. The notes sang briefly, a haunting echo, then fell silent as he pulled back. "It's late," he said, his tone resuming its edge. "Rest for tomorrow." He left as abruptly as he'd come, the door clicking shut, leaving Noor with the echo of his words and a flicker of something human beneath his steel. She returned to her room, the novel forgotten on the bed, and sank onto the silk sheets, the piano's melody still ringing in her ears. Zaid was a puzzle, cold, commanding, yet tethered to a past he didn't share. The mansion's luxury surrounded her, marble, silk, gold, but it was a hollow shell, its beauty a mask for the isolation within. She thought of Sammy, his voice a distant comfort, and the child she'd soon carry, a stranger's heir she couldn't keep. The contract bound her, a chain she couldn't break. But Zaid's fleeting vulnerability lingered, a crack in the facade she couldn't unsee. Sleep eluded her, the shadows of luxury stretching long and dark, whispering of a man she didn't yet understand, and a future she couldn't yet face. The dawn light filtered through the sheer curtains of Noor Hassan's room in Zaid al-Mansour's Dubai mansion. casting delicate shadows across the silk-draped bed where she lay restless. That morning, Salma knocked softly, her warm smile a fleeting comfort. "Time for the doctor, Noor," she said, her hijab framing her gentle face. Noor nodded, rising with a heaviness that belied the plush surroundings, and followed Salma to the limousine waiting beyond the mansion's iron gates. The drive cut through Dubai's gleaming heart, skyscrapers piercing the sky, streets alive with luxury cars, until they reached a sleek clinic, its glass facade reflecting the desert sun. Dr. Ibrahim greeted them, a calm man with graying hair and a reassuring voice, his office a sterile contrast to the mansion's warmth. "Everything's in order," he said after the exams, his tone clinical as he reviewed her chart. "We can begin the fertilization process today." Noor sat stiffly, her hands clasped tight in her lap, the word fertilization a cold spike through her. She nodded, her throat too dry to speak, her eyes darting to Zaid, who stood near the window, his thobe crisp, his face a mask of detachment. He observed the procedure from afar, arms crossed, his piercing eyes tracking every move with the precision of a man overseeing a transaction. The needle pricked her arm, the room blurring as she focused on Sammy's face. His gap-toothed grin, his small hand in hers, clinging to it like a lifeline. When it was done, Dr. Ibrahim smiled faintly. "Rest now. We'll monitor progress." Zaid gave a curt nod, his voice low. "Take her back, Salma." Noor followed, her legs unsteady, the weight of what she'd begun pressing down like stone. Back at the mansion, the days stretched into a fragile routine. Noor explored its vastness to distract herself, the library's endless shelves, the garden's whispering fountains, but the opulence felt like a cage. Zaid remained a distant figure, his presence fleeting, his words sparse and practical. "Eat well," he'd say, or "rest," his tone a command rather than concern, his focus on the contract's endgame, an heir. Yet cracks began to show. One morning Salma brought a tray to her room, spiced flatbreads and sweet dates, flavors from Riverton she'd mentioned in passing. "Mr. Zaid asked for these," Salma said, her smile knowing. Noor stared at the food, a warmth flickering in her chest, a gesture she couldn't reconcile with his cold exterior. Their interaction shifted too. Evenings found them in the garden, Zaid tending his rare plants while Noor sat nearby, a book open but unread. "This was my mother's," he said once, clipping a thorny stem, his voice softer than usual. "She found peace in it." Noor glanced up, startled by the glimpse of memory, but he turned away, the moment gone as quickly as it came. Another night, he joined her for dinner in the grand dining hall, a table meant for dozens dwarfing their quiet meal. The silence stretched until he broke it, pouring water with a steady hand. "Are you adjusting?" he asked, his eyes flicking to hers. "I'm trying," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor inside. "It's not my world." He nodded, a faint crease in his brow, but said no more, leaving her to wonder at the man beneath the steel. The turning point came at a formal dinner Zaid hosted for business associates, a glittering affair in the mansion's banquet hall. Noor descended the grand staircase in a flowing emerald gown Salma had chosen, its fabric shimmering under the chandeliers, her steps faltering under the weight of unfamiliar elegance. Guests in sharp suits and ornate robes filled the room, their eyes tracing her with curiosity, some polite, others appraising, as Zaid introduced her as "my companion." The title hung heavy, a shield and a chain, and she forced a smile, her hands clasped tight to hide their trembling. The evening wore on, a blur of clinking glasses and murmured deals, until Zaid guided her to a quieter corner, away from the crowd's hum. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, a rare note of concern threading through it. Noor blinked, caught off guard by the question, the first crack in his usual detachment. "I'm trying to adjust," she said, echoing her earlier words, her honesty slipping free. "It's overwhelming." He studied her, his dark eyes softening for a fleeting second, then nodded. "You're doing well," he said, a simple statement that landed like a lifeline. He stayed close after that, a steady presence amid the sea of strangers, his hand brushing hers once, a gesture so brief she might have imagined it. Back in her room, Noor sank onto the bed, the gown pooling around her, the night's echoes swirling in her mind. Zaid's question lingered. Are you okay? A crack in the facade she'd built of him as a cold, unyielding force. The mansion's luxury surrounded her. Marble columns, silk drapes, the distant trickle of fountains. But it was his small acts that pierced the isolation. The food, the garden talks, the quiet concern. She thought of Sammy, his voice a distant ache, and the child now growing within her, a tie to Zaid she couldn't yet fathom. The contract loomed, its chains unbroken, but beneath it, something stirred. A flicker of connection, fragile and undefined, casting shadows she couldn't ignore. Sleep came slowly, the cracks widening, hinting at a man she might one day understand, and a future she couldn't yet see. The late afternoon sun slanted through the towering windows of Zaid al-Mansour's Dubai mansion, casting long shadows across the living room's marble floor where Noor Hassan sat, a novel splayed across her lap. A month had passed since the clinic, her body whispering the first signs of pregnancy, tiredness tugging at her limbs, a faint queasiness she masked with deep breaths. At 28, she'd settled into the mansion's rhythm, its luxury, silk cushions, gleaming chandeliers, a stark backdrop to the ache for Sammy, her 6-year-old son, left in Riverton. The contract's terms loomed: bear Zaid's child, then leave. A deal she'd struck for Sammy's survival, its weight heavier with each passing day. She traced the book's edges, her mind drifting to Sammy's last call, his small voice chirping through the phone. Mama, when soon? She'd hidden him, a photo tucked deep in her duffel, a secret she guarded from this world of wealth and cold agreements. Zaid's recent gestures, Riverton dishes, a shared silence in the garden, had chipped at her wariness, but trust remained a fragile thread. Footsteps snapped her back, Zaid, his thobe crisp, stepping in with a purpose that made her heart lurch. In his hand, a worn photo dangled, Sammy's grinning face staring up, and his dark eyes bore into hers. "Who is this boy?" he asked, his voice low, tight with a controlled edge. Noor's breath caught, her hands trembling as she rose, the book tumbling to the sofa. "My son," she said, the confession spilling out, raw and unsteady. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating, Zaid's jaw clenching as he closed the distance, the photo a quiet accusation. "You lied," he said, sharp and low, his gaze unrelenting. "Why keep this from me?" Tears pricked her eyes, but she held his stare, her voice shaking. "I was scared. Scared you'd think I couldn't do this, that it'd ruin everything." Her hands balled into fists, steadying her. "His name's Sammy." Zaid's eyes narrowed, the photo quivering in his grip. "And you agreed to this, leaving another child, knowing you had him?" The question cut deep, her resolve cracking as tears fell. "For him," she choked out, her voice breaking with every word. "The bills piling up, the rent we couldn't pay, nights he slept hungry. I had no way out. I did this so he'd have a life." Her sacrifice hung between them, bare and unyielding, and Zaid's expression shifted, shock softening into something unreadable, a flicker of pain in his dark eyes. He turned to the window, the desert sprawling beyond, his silence heavy as he wrestled with her truth. Noor wiped her face, her breath ragged, bracing for rejection, a demand to leave, the contract's end. Instead he spoke, his voice quieter, threaded with a past she hadn't glimpsed. "You should have told me," he said, staring at the dunes. "I grew up with a father who buried himself in work after my mother died. No answers, no warmth. I won't let your son feel that." He faced her, resolve hardening his features. "You can visit him regularly, but he can't know about this, not yet." Noor blinked, stunned, relief crashing over her like a wave. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely there. Zaid's gaze softened, a rare crack in his armor. "Because I know loss, Noor. He deserves you, even if it's just moments, for now." She nodded, tears of gratitude mingling with guilt, his mercy a lifeline she hadn't expected. He set the photo on the table, a fragile truce, and left her with the echo of his words, a bridge forming where walls once stood. The next day a car whisked her to Riverton, the desert blurring into green fields, her heart pounding with anticipation. At Mrs. Fatima's door, Sammy barreled into her arms, his thin frame tight against her. "Mama!" he cried, his joy piercing her as she held him, his warmth erasing the miles. They played, tag in the yard, stories on the stoop, his laughter a melody she'd craved. But dusk came too soon, the goodbye a quiet ache. "Soon, my love," she promised, kissing his forehead, his trust cutting deeper as she drove away. Back at the mansion, Noor sank onto her bed, drained yet lighter, Zaid waiting when she emerged into the living room. "How is he?" he asked, his tone soft, his eyes searching hers with a concern she hadn't seen before. "Happy," she said, vulnerable, meeting his gaze. "But leaving him, it hurts." Zaid nodded, a quiet understanding settling between them, the first roots of trust taking hold. She was 2 months pregnant, a tie to Zaid growing within her. But Sammy's presence had shifted the ground beneath them, hinting at a bond beyond the contract's cold lines. The Dubai mansion hummed with a subtle shift as spring bled into summer, its marble halls softening under the patter of small feet and the echo of laughter. Noor Hassan stood in the garden, her hand resting on her swelling belly. 5 months pregnant now, the flutter of life within her a quiet companion to the ache for Sammy. At 28, she'd carved a fragile piece in Zaid al-Mansour's world, her visits to Riverton a lifeline since he'd adjusted the contract after learning of her son. Each trip, every 2 weeks, brought Sammy's hugs and stories, his trust in her soon a bittersweet balm, but the goodbyes grew harder, tearing at her resolve. Zaid watched her from the terrace one morning, his thobe catching the breeze, his dark eyes tracing her silhouette against the fountains. At 35, he'd softened since the photo's revelation, his cold precision yielding to moments of warmth, like the books he left for her or the way he lingered during their garden talks. Today he descended the steps, his presence steady beside her. "You're restless," he said, his voice low, observant. Noor met his gaze, her honesty slipping free. "I miss him, every day. The visits help, but it's not enough." Zaid nodded, his jaw tightening as he considered her words, a decision brewing behind his piercing eyes. That afternoon, he joined her on a trip to Riverton, the limousine cutting through dunes and highways, a quiet gesture she hadn't expected. At Mrs. Fatima's door, Sammy bounded out, his dark curls wild, his grin lighting the dim porch. "Mama!" he cried, then paused, eyeing Zaid curiously. "Who's he?" Noor knelt, her heart pounding. "This is Zaid, a friend. He wanted to meet you." Zaid crouched, his smile faint but genuine. "Hello, Sammy. I've heard a lot about you." Sammy tilted his head, then offered a shy wave, and Noor's chest warmed at the sight. The man who'd bought her future meeting the boy who'd driven her to sell it. The visit stretched into hours. Sammy showing Zaid his toy cars, Zaid listening with a patience that surprised her, even joining a makeshift race on the stoop. When they left, Sammy hugged Zaid's leg, a small "Bye, Zaid," echoing as they drove away. In the car, Zaid's silence was thoughtful, his gaze distant. "He's a good boy," he said finally, his tone soft. "He deserves more than visits." Noor's breath caught, hope flickering. "What do you mean?" Zaid turned to her, resolve hardening his features. "Bring him here, to live with us. I'll adjust the contract again. You shouldn't be torn apart." Her eyes widened, tears pricking as his words sank in. "You'd do that?" she whispered. He nodded, a rare vulnerability breaking through. "I've lived with absence, Noor. I won't let him, or you, feel it too." The decision reshaped their world. Days later, Sammy arrived, his small duffel dwarfed by the mansion's grandeur, his eyes huge as he took in the marble and fountains. "This is home now?" he asked, clutching Noor's hand. "Yes, my love," she said, hugging him tight, Zaid watching with a quiet smile. Salma beamed, guiding Sammy to a room she'd prepared, bright walls, toys from Riverton, a space that felt like his. The months unfurled in a tender rhythm, Sammy's laughter weaving through the halls, his chatter softening the mansion's edges. Noor's pregnancy progressed, her belly rounding by month 7, her bond with Zaid deepening through shared moments. Dinners where Sammy recounted his day, garden walks where Zaid taught him plant names, nights in the library where they traded stories. Zaid opened up, his mother's death, his father's distance, his voice low, unguarded, while Noor shared Riverton's struggles, Sammy's birth, her fears for the future. "I never wanted to need anyone," Zaid admitted once, his hand brushing hers. "Until you." Her heart raced, the contract fading beneath a connection she hadn't planned. By month 8, the air thickened with anticipation. One evening, as Noor rested on the terrace, a sharp pain gripped her, her breath hitching as she clutched the railing. "Salma!" she gasped, the housekeeper rushing over, eyes wide. "It's happening! Get Zaid!" Salma darted inside, returning with Zaid, his calm fracturing as he saw her wince. "Now," he said, his voice firm, taking her arm with a steady grip. The drive to the hospital was a blur, Zaid beside her, his hand tight around hers, his whispers cutting through her fear. "You're strong, Noor. I'm here." Hours bled together, pain, sweat, Zaid's unwavering presence as the medical team worked. Then a cry broke the tension, sharp and alive, and Noor's exhaustion melted into awe as a tiny boy was placed in her arms. His dark eyes, like Sammy's, met hers, and tears streamed down her face. Zaid leaned close, his breath catching as he touched the baby's cheek, his voice thick. "He's perfect. Our son." They named him Tariq, Morning Star, a light born from their journey. Days later, Noor rested in her room, Tariq cradled beside her, his small breaths a rhythm of peace. Zaid entered, an envelope in hand, his expression tender yet resolute. "Noor," he began, sitting close. "This contract, it's nothing now." He tore it before her stunned eyes, pieces fluttering to the floor. "You've changed me, given me a family, a life I didn't know I could have. I love you." Her heart swelled, tears falling as he opened a velvet box, a diamond ring glinting inside. "Marry me," he said, his voice a vow. "Yes," she breathed, joy breaking through. "I love you too." Sammy burst in, hugging them, and Zaid lifted him, their laughter sealing a bond beyond paper, a family forged in trust, ready for a new dawn. The sprawling gardens of Zaid Al Mansour's Dubai mansion shimmered under a late October sun, their transformation into a wedding wonderland, a testament to the love now rooting within its walls. Jasmine and desert roses twined through arched trellises, their sweet perfume mingling with the warm breeze, while strings of delicate lanterns swayed overhead, promising a starlit glow as dusk approached. Tables draped in gold and ivory stretched across the lawn, laden with a feast that bridged worlds. Dubai's spiced kebabs and flatbreads beside Riverton's sweet cornbread and pecan tarts. At 28, Noor Hassan stood at the threshold of this new chapter, her white gown shimmering with golden threads, a blend of her humble roots and Zaid's heritage, its fabric whispering promises as she adjusted her veil. Inside, the mansion buzzed with life, a far cry from the sterile silence of Noor's early days. Salma darted through the halls, her hijab pinned with a small rose, her warm smile brighter than ever as she oversaw the staff. "You're a vision, Noor," she said, fussing with the veil's edges, her eyes crinkling with pride. Sammy, now 6 and brimming with energy, raced past in a tiny suit, the velvet pouch with the rings clutched tight in his hands. "I'm the ring guy, Mama," he shouted, his dark curls bouncing as he skidded to a halt. Zaid emerged from his study, his usual thobe traded for a tailored suit with intricate Arabic embroidery, his tan face softening as he caught Noor's gaze. "You're stunning," he murmured, his voice low, his piercing eyes shimmering with a tenderness that stole her breath. The week since Tariq's birth had woven their family tighter. Sammy's chatter filling the mansion, Tariq's coos a gentle melody, Zaid's steady presence anchoring them all. His proposal, the contract's ashes scattered on the floor, had marked a rebirth, their bond deepening through shared nights, Sammy's bedtime stories, Tariq's feedings, Zaid's quiet confessions of a lonely past. Sammy had taken to Zaid, their chess matches and garden lessons a bridge between them, while Tariq, with his dark eyes and tiny fists, bound them in a love Noor hadn't dared imagine. Today, under the desert sky, they'd cement that love with vows, a family forged from sacrifice now stepping into light. The ceremony unfolded as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. Guests gathered beneath the floral arch, Zaid's business allies in sharp suits, Riverton neighbors wide-eyed at the splendor, Salma's kin blending with Dubai's elite. A stage stood ready, the officiant in robes that married tradition with simplicity, his presence a calm anchor. Sami led the procession, his chest puffed with pride as he carried the rings, whispering to Zaid, "Don't mess it up." A ripple of laughter eased the crowd, and Noor stepped forward, her hand finding Zaid's, his grip warm and sure, grounding her racing heart. Their vows were a quiet symphony, raw and real, echoing their journey. "Noor," Zaid began, his voice steady yet thick with emotion, "you walked into my life a stranger and gave me everything. Trust, love, a family I never knew I needed. I promise to stand with you, to cherish you, Sami and Tariq, through every storm and sunrise." Tears welled in Noor's eyes, her voice trembling as she replied, "Zaid, you saw me when I was invisible, gave me hope when I had none. I promise to love you, to build with you, to hold our family close always." They slid the rings on, hers a slim band with a diamond, his a gold circle etched with subtle patterns, and sealed their words with a kiss, tender and fierce, the crowd's cheers washing over them like a tide. The reception bloomed into a celebration of unity, music weaving their worlds together. Arabic ouds strumming alongside a Riverton fiddler's lively reels, guests swaying under the lantern glow. Sami darted between tables, Tariq cradled in Salma's arms, his tiny hands grasping at her scarf as she laughed. Noor and Zaid moved through the throng, enveloped in warmth, Mrs. Fatima's tearful embrace, a business partner's hearty toast, each moment a stitch in their new life. The feast flowed, hummus and grilled lamb beside mashed potatoes and gravy, a harmony of flavors mirroring their blended love. As night deepened, stars blanketed the sky, a vast canopy over the garden's heart. Zaid drew Noor to the dance floor, a cleared circle where lanterns cast a soft shimmer. The music slowed, an oud's haunting notes weaving through the air, and they swayed, her head against his chest, his arms encircling her. "This is home," she whispered, her voice muffled in his embrace. "You made it so," he replied, his breath warm on her hair, his hand tightening on hers. Sami tugged at them, and they lifted him between them, spinning as a trio, his giggles blending with the melody. Tariq's coos a distant echo from Salma's arms. Guests drifted off as the hour grew late, leaving the family in a quiet radiance. Sami sat on a blanket, showing Tariq a flower he'd plucked, his whispers soft and serious. Noor and Zaid stood by the fountain, its water glinting under the moon, their hands entwined. "From that auction to this," she said, her eyes tracing the stars. "It's a miracle." Zaid's gaze settled on her, fierce and tender. "You're the miracle, Noor. You, Sami, Tariq. This is more than I dared dream." She smiled, tears of joy glistening, and leaned into him, the mansion alive with their love. A home, not a cage. The night closed with one last dance, just them, the world fading to their rhythm. Under the desert stars, Noor and Zaid held each other, Sami and Tariq nearby, a family forged through trials now unbreakable. What began with a desperate bid had blossomed into redemption, a love that shattered contracts, a horizon boundless with hope. As the music stilled, they stood wrapped in each other, ready for every dawn, their story a testament to the power of trust and the promise of forever. Noor and Zaid's wedding under Dubai's stars wasn't just a celebration, it was a triumph of love over $1 million bargain, a family forged from secrets and sacrifice. With Sami's laughter and Tariq's tiny hands, their mansion transformed from a cold empire into a home brimming with light. This journey proves that even in our darkest deals, hope can bloom and love can rewrite any story. Let their courage inspire you to chase your own horizon. Loved this tale? Hit that subscribe button below. Join us for more stories that warm the heart and lift the spirit.